Welcome into a special National Championship Reaction Edition. We're recording this on Sunday, April 6th. This is the Women's Basketball Podcast. Mia O'Brien, Mitchell Northam, live in Tampa. If you are watching on YouTube, folks, or if you are listening on podcast, don't forget we are also available on YouTube. You're going to want to see where Mitch is recording this podcast live from. I thought he was at Rainforest Cafe. Evidently, he is still in Amalie Arena. They have some exotic restaurant going on, and I'm very excited already to record this podcast. But now seeing your backdrop, Mitch, let's get funky with it. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, I will say I don't know what the name of this particular establishment is called, but they have a couple options here. And I did try. They have like fried chicken sandwiches that were really good. Had that the other day at the Final Four. There's also a sushi place that was also very good. So fourth floor of Amalie Arena, you're doing good things.
I know we talked last week about restaurant recommendations. If you're able to take the listeners behind the curtain, what spots have you hit? And also what injury may you have also hit in your travels? Just so our listeners understand, like Mitch is not only pulling double duty for SB Nation and for the Women's Basketball Podcast on OG Triangle Media. This man is doing it on a bum ankle.
I am, yeah. So I'm trying to think. Good restaurant I've been to. Went to this place called The Pearl that's near the arena. That was pretty good. I also went to a place called Hat Tricks, which was the bar that I mentioned in the last podcast that I went to in Tampa in 2019, where I had really good wings at. That place still exists, still open. They still have really good wings. So The Pearl and Hat Tricks, most very good two places I went to. And then in Alabama, Full Moon Barbecue, which was, I believe, a recommendation of producer Dimitri, which really came through in the clutch. And then, yes, last night, after I had a great dinner at a restaurant I can't remember the name of, I stepped off a curb the wrong way, and I rolled my ankle and fell, and was immediately in pain and had to drive to Walmart and get an ankle wrap. And so here I am. I'm coming to you live from some unknown establishment in Amalie Arena. I have my foot propped up on a bar stool, and we're powering through it. We're here, and we're doing the thing.
Is it Amalie? Is it Amalie? I've lived in Florida.
I don't know, actually.
Years.
Yeah,
I still don't know. I don't know the difference, and I've lived here for 6+ years. So that's all you need to know. If you know, leave it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you guys. If you leave a comment or review, because women's college basketball season for 2024-2025 has come to a close. Mitch is indeed live at the site of the national title game, where our final score, UConn 82, South Carolina 59. I led by saying this podcast is going to be a little non-traditional for those of you who listen to the pod each and every week. We love you guys. With that said, the reason it's non-traditional, I think it goes without saying, her of the week, Paige Bueckers. The prophecy has been fulfilled. It took 5 years, but the number one overall recruit in the class of 2020 has done what she set out to do. She has led GenoAuriema back to the mountaintop, his 12th national title, the first since 2016. Bueckers finishes with 17 points, a little bit modest compared to the 40-piece she dropped earlier in the tournament and some of the double-digit scoring performances she's put up each of the last few weeks. We have to start with Paige, Mitch, before we get to our top 5 storylines coming out of Final Four week. But initial impressions of this game between the Huskies and Gamecocks, which, quite frankly, I don't think a lot of people saw this one coming. Maybe you did, though.
No. So I did think that UConn was going to win. I thought that it would be a lot closer than the first time that they played in South Carolina. I was wrong. They boat raced South Carolina, basically. Not quite start to finish, but, had a good lead at halftime. And then AZ Flood scores 11 points in the third quarter. And really, they just pulled away from there. But yeah, like you, I thought going into the game, coming out of the game, the story was Paige Bueckers. So I wrote, a kind of longish game column on her over at SB Nation's Breakaway, basically just talking about when she first came into women's college basketball, she was the hype. She was the story. She had more attention around her than Caitlin Clark at the time. She was the freshman, the National Player of the Year as a freshman. I mean, just so much hype, so much on her shoulders. We thought that this moment for her was going to come a lot sooner. A lot of people thought it would happen multiple times, and it didn't. That's for a lot of different reasons. And Paige battled injuries throughout her career. This is her second time playing in the national title game. But yeah, I really thought that this cemented her legacy. This could have gone one of two ways, right? She could have either left UConn as the best player in program history to not win a national title, or she could be the person credited for putting UConn back atop the sport, which is now what her legacy is. After, a drought of 9 years is not really a drought at most places, but for UConn women's basketball, it very much was. It felt like a long time. It was almost a decade. And now Paige, along with AZ Flood and Sarah Strong to an extent, dragged them back to the top of the mountaintop. I really thought that like Paige's legacy was really the whole story of like this weekend, how it was going to end, and ends with her cutting down a net and wearing said net to the press conference. But it was kind of interesting. I was told that Paige Bueckers has gone like 7 months or something without drinking a soda. So before she hopped up to the press conference stage, she took a long pull from a can of Coca-Cola and then went to the press conference. So that was just a fun little thing.
I hope she's sponsored by them, considering the Caitlin Clark Gatorade moment on the Bird and Taurasi show today.
Sure, yeah.
Caitlin had to make sure always be marketing. That is actually a verbatim line I've heard from her.
I'm surprised the NCAA did not give her a Powerade cup to drink said Gatorade from, considering she was in the arena.
Yeah, well, it's Caitlin, so I guess she can do what she wants. But speaking of Caitlin, we will circle back to her because she is part of this conversation. But it's fascinating to me, as you noted, that Paige Bueckers is the headliner. That is the story coming out of Final Four weekend, destiny fulfilled. And yet it's AZ Fudd and Sarah Strong who pop off for 24 points. Caitlin actually mentioned on the Bird and Taurasi show, she thinks AZ Fudd has the purest stroke of any shooter in college or the pros right now, or at the very least, she's among the purest shooters. And certainly Sarah Strong, if you didn't know her name, you do now. And that's what is so interesting to me coming out of this game, Mitch, because we're going to give our way too early predictions for 2026 and the Final Four. I think knowing AZ Fudd is coming back and knowing Sarah Strong has to come back, given that she is only a freshman, folks, that is where I wonder, do those two enter the national conscious at quite the level that Paige Bueckers has?
I think it's definitely possible for AZ next season because a couple of different things working in her factor. Number one, she had this great NCAA tournament run where she was, really like a lights out shooter, especially in the Final Four. She wins Final Four most outstanding player. I saw a lot of people talking about how good her shot is. I think Steph Curry had something to say about it, and Kevin Durant. And
Kevin Durant did as well, yes.
Yeah. So, that's working in her favor. Like, she has momentum going into next season. The other thing is there's going to be a bit of a stardom void to fill next year because not only do you have Paige moving on, but you have Juju probably out for the season. So it's like, okay, Hannah Hidalgo, Lauren Betts, Madison Booker, Flau'jae.
Where will Flau'jae actually be playing?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a chance. I think like you can book it now. I think AZ Fudd and Sarah Strong are both going to be preseason All-Americans. And we'll see what happens from there. We'll get to this a little bit later, but I wouldn't be surprised to see UConn back in the Final Four next year.
I agree with that sentiment. As we begin this week's Starting Five Final Four edition, we've already mentioned those three big names that are certainly the story coming out of this national title game. But I'm wearing the GOAT hat for a very specific reason, Mitch. Not only because it is the unofficial secret mascot of the Players' Championship here in Northeast Florida, but because GenoAuriema, now with 12 titles to his game spanning 30 years, the first title this season since 2016. A lot of folks online want to debate, is he the GOAT, not just of women's basketball coaching, but of all time? Let's start there before we get into the conversation. And of course, Mitch is live in Tampa, so I'm fascinated to hear some of the conversations you've had on Press Row before we dive into is this the end of the road for Geno conversation?
Yeah. So let's talk about the GOAT thing first. So yes, I think you could certainly make the case. I think certainly he is the greatest women's basketball coach of all time. Is he the greatest college basketball coach of all time? Probably. He's got 12 rings now. And then you get into the debate of, okay, is he the greatest coach in any sport? I think maybe more than any other coach has, Geno has dragged his sport into relevancy and basically made other programs and other schools compete at his level I think that, Geno had this stretch in the mid 2000s where like he had that rival with Pat Summitt at Tennessee, right? And then he had that rivalry with Notre Dame and Muffet McGraw, and he had a little thing with Tara Vanderveer in Stanford. And then you get into the 2010s and he rips off 4 in a row with those Stewie teams. And at the end of that, Pat Summitt has passed away, unfortunately, and Tennessee is in a bit of a funk. They're not as good as they once were. UConn is and has been for the last 25 years the most iconic program in this sport, the biggest brand and everything else. And I think that run of 4 in a row with Stewie is the one that really made other programs around the country go, why can't we have what UConn has? And it's like, well, it's very simple. Do you want to invest in women's basketball the way that UConn has? And there are some schools that decided, yes, we do want to do that. And some schools who decided we want to pay our coaches good money and we want to pay our assistant coaches good money and we want to make our facilities better and amenities. And then in this latest era, we want to invest NIL and give our players those opportunities as well. And I think Geno, you can give him a large chunk of credit. I heard Courtney Bankard and somebody else talk about this earlier this year when Geno was surpassing first Mike Krzyzewski and then Tara Vanderveer in the all-time wins record. But basically they were saying like, Geno winning at the level that he did, when it was happening in real time, there were all those like lame columns and talking heads who were like, is UConn bad for women's basketball? And it's like, no, and it turns out in the long run, that run was great. There's a reason why since that four-peat, we haven't had a repeat champion in the sport. And we've had a lot of other different champions. We've had the rise of DawnStaley at South Carolina. Kim Mulkey's won at 2 different schools in that span, got another Stanford title, got another Notre Dame title. But we've also seen teams like Virginia Tech and Arizona and UCLA make the Final Four for the first time. We saw Iowa resurge, get to the Final Four for the first time since the 90s. So you have all these different programs in all these different parts of the country really investing in women's basketball. And I think Geno deserves a big credit for that. I think he's the reason why, I think coaches and I think administrators saw what UConn had in women's basketball and was like, why can't we do that? And the answer is money. And so it was just putting money in the right hands and empowering the right people and investing the right way. And now you have a lot of different programs in the country who really care about women's college basketball and are really good at it.
And when someone asked me this question prior to the thumping of South Carolina in the national title game, my response was yes, because you can't tell the story of the sport without GenoAuriema.
Absolutely.
And because of the longevity. The other person, though, that you can't tell the history and the story of the sport without is Pat Summitt. And because we lost Pat Summitt relatively prematurely and at the peak of her powers, maybe not so much, but certainly Tennessee was competitive when she had to step away. And that is where it's hard for me to introduce, with all due respect, and this is not because of the final score today, it's very difficult for me to introduce DawnStaley into that conversation just yet, knowing that those two figures still exist. And knowing that one of them, at least as of this writing or this podcast, is still a head coach in women's college basketball. And so I think that part of the story and part of why we can't introduce Dawn into that conversation is because Geno is the undisputed GOAT. And number two, because we lost Pat so early that it feels like part of that story was left untold. And almost as a homage, she will always be second for that reason. Now, I also would introduce, and this was one of the best responses I saw online when the GOAT debate was raging on this afternoon as the women's national title game was rolling on. The two names that I saw on the wrestling side of things, Dan Gable, because not only did he bring national titles to Iowa and bring the sport of wrestling, Greco-Roman style wrestling, to the national conscious, but he also was the coach of Olympic teams. And that, of course, is something that you look at Geno, you look at, Mike Krzyzewski and their involvement with Team USA, and does that play a factor? The modern day version that someone else threw back at this person who said Dan Gable was Cael Sanderson at Penn State, who has also now led the Nittany Lions on a run that looks a lot like what Gable was able to do in Iowa City once upon a time. But again, the idea of not only have you won double-digit national titles, but you have also dragged a sport into the American consciousness, that for me is what signifies if you are actually the GOAT coach of your sport.
Yeah, I think Dan Gable is a pretty good comp. I didn't think of that one. Yeah, and John Wooden, for men's basketball,
Mhm.
I think Geno is right up there with almost any of them, and then you can debate like who's better, who had the more impact and stuff like that. But yeah, to your point about Dawn, I think if she had won today, I would have considered her for sort of a spot on like the women's basketball coaches Mount Rushmore. And she can certainly still get
She
there,
still
but
could get there.
I
Yep.
think right now, for me, it would be Geno, Pat Summitt, Tara Vanderveer, and probably Kim Mulkey. Kim Mulkey has 4 titles, and she's the only one to do it with 2 different programs. Tara Vanderveer had more wins than
And then
anyone
she
else.
won one as a player as well, so that's technically
right. Before Geno surpassed her earlier this year and, basically made Stanford into the powerhouse that it is. I think Tara deserves a little bit more credit because it's harder to win at Stanford than it is a UConn or a Tennessee just because of all the constraints. But yeah, I think that would be like my Mount Rushmore at the moment. Geno, Pat, Tara, and Kim Mulkey. But I think certainly there is time for Dawn to squeeze her way in there. She's certainly on her way. I think if you ask me to pick a 5th person, it's probably her. So I think this one firmly establishes Geno as the GOAT women's basketball coach. I think he already was, but a GOAT among the greatest coaches in any sport.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Uh-oh.
And I'm going to, look, you guys know me well enough. I'm going to argue for Nick Saban. However, my argument for Nick Saban is actually kind of an argument for Geno too. I don't know that Dawn would fall into this. I don't even know that Kim would fall into this so much. To establish dominance in your sport when the sport is, in 2 very different eras of your sport, I think is really hard to do. And I guess if I'm saying Saban did that in football, I guess Kim Mulkey's career in basketball sort of spans the same year. So yeah, let's include Kim in this conversation. But I think that it is really hard. Let me rephrase. For Geno to get started was much easier than it is to now climb back to the top of the mountain. But the fact that he did it and the fact that from when he started to the Stewie years to now, like college football, you had pre-BCS, post-BCS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pre-CFP, post-CFP. Those are 2 distinct eras, even though there was something before the BCS. I think you could argue that women's basketball has gone through 3 or 4 in Geno's time.
Yeah. And I think the argument for Saban is he did it he basically said there was a couple different things, right? Where he said, okay, this is how you want to play with the passing and with the RPOs and that sort of thing. Okay, I'll evolve if this is how you want to do it. And then the transfer portal came and he said, okay, if this is how you want to do it, I'll evolve and I'll win in this era too. And yeah, to Dimitri's point, the time periods, I think Geno and Nick are about the same age. They've won sort of, in this sort of same time span there.
Yeah, I would put Saban and Coach K in that same bucket if we're to talk about coaches that have had no issue changing the shades of their jacket or their skins of the lizard or however you want to, whatever analogy you want to use.
Changing on and off the court, and both of them adapted to it. And
if it's one and done, I'll figure it out. If it's transfer portal, I'll figure it out, and I will continue the song and dance. I'm not gonna lie, producer Dimitri pops on, and I'm like, oh no, did we mess something up? I think a better comp for his argument with Saban and versus Geno and this idea of Saban came into a college football world that, while yes, is very different than the current one, it was much more established than women's basketball. The better comp is the New York Yankees. Those who question their 27 world titles when the majority of them came in a playoff structure that if you won the American League, you went to the World Series and you did not have to actually go through a multi-round postseason. And so I would argue that this idea of, well, Geno had a head start in a previous era, that's much more them than it is, Nick Saban, who I would argue still entered a college football world that maybe it didn't have the parity that we do now see, but it certainly had more parity. For the sake of time, I want to keep the conversation going because I do want to circle back to Dawn and what Dawn's legacy is after this dismantling at the hands of UConn. But first, Mitch, boots on the ground in Tampa, Florida. Did it feel like to you, and I know he just signed a contract extension, Did it feel like to you there was a sense in the air that this may be it for GenoAuriema?
Mostly no, except there was this moment in the post-game press conference where he was basically talking about how, people told him he should have retired after the last Stewie title. And then kind of the years went by and he felt like he needed to prove something, like he needed to be able to do it, I guess, without Stewie or without that specific group. And he basically said, if we had won the title in Paige's sophomore year where they lost to South Carolina and Minneapolis, maybe he left. Maybe he would have left then. But then as it went on and as Paige had her injury and then came back from that, he said, I believe he said, her journey became my journey. But I feel like
her journey's over.
Right. But I also feel like if you're him, there's no real signs of him slowing down from a physical or mental standpoint. And you have this team with Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd next year. And Sarah Strong seems to me to be like a unicorn, once in a lifetime player in terms of just her combination of size and court vision and passing and scoring ability and skill. Whatever WNBA draft she enters in, she's going to be the number 1 overall pick. So I kind of wonder, maybe that is the player that he goes off into the sunset with. But we'll see. If you asked me to bet on it, I would say no, this is not it for Geno. I think at the very least, we see him run next year back.
As Kevin, my boyfriend, likes to say, everything in Mia's world always comes back to the University of Iowa. And so that's where I ask you, Mitch, because you were at the Final Four in Cleveland last year. If I had asked you that question 1 year ago today about Lisa Bluter and said, do you think she hangs it up? What would you have said?
I would have said no. I didn't see that one coming at all.
And here we are. And for Lisa, it was a lot. It was a couple different things. It was, look, Caitlin Clark is a generational player. As much as Addie Deal is going to be electric when she arrives in Iowa City this summer, I can't guarantee it. I can't guarantee, no one can, that will be similar lightning in a bottle to what 4 years of Caitlin Clark brought to Lisa Bluter and her program, which had already gone to the Elite Eight 2 years prior to Caitlin arriving on campus and was reaching the pinnacle of the sport prior to her arrival, and then obviously entered a different stratosphere. I also think, and Lisa was very open about this, wanted to see her son, his final season of college basketball, in Grinnell in central Iowa. And also she wanted to be around her daughters more, wanted to travel with Dave. Shout out Dave. I have Dave's book somewhere here in my bookshelf, her husband. And I applaud that. In the same vein as I was stunned by Nick Saban hanging it up, and apparently that was him and Miss Terry kind of looking at each other and saying that they wanted to travel. Roy Williams has made it very well known, and now we have seen it over the last 4 or 5 years. That man wants to see every minor league baseball park in America. He wants to go to every college basketball arena in America. I don't know what hobbies Geno has outside of basketball. I was worried about Nick Saban because he didn't have hobbies. Roy Williams and Lisa Bluter have hobbies. They have people that they want to travel with.
Yeah.
Just like I'm worried about Kirby Smart. I am genuinely worried about the guy because he likes golf, but he hates golf. He's only doing it just because they're telling him he has to do something else. I worry that that's the issue with GenoAuriema. And it's not an issue, but it suggests that he's just going to keep doing this until he drops.
I think when Geno retires, we will not hear from him. I think he is going to go to somewhere in Italy, and he's going to be there, and he's going to have some wine. And we will not really see him in the public eye as much as we are seeing Roy Williams or someone like that. Yeah. But I don't think Geno's at that point yet. Like to your point, I think he still has more to coach. And he seemed, this weekend, a big talking point. I wrote about this over at SB Nation too. Geno was one of several coaches who were complaining about the double regional site thing and all that stuff, and he's someone who still really cares about the shape of the game and the growth of the game and who's taking care of the game and that sort of thing. And he's still, one of the sport's biggest spokespeople, I feel like. And so it seems like he has more to do in this space.
Speaking of people who have more to do, let's finally get to number 2 in this week's starting 5. We took a long, winding road to get there, but DawnStaley, what is her legacy? Because for me, Mitch, and I told people this on Friday morning, it didn't matter if DawnStaley, well, we guaranteed you on this podcast she would beat Vic Schaefer again, 14-3. Never forget. Easy
Death
money.
Taxes, DawnStaley beating Vic Schaefer in the postseason.
So I saw someone through 16-3. I don't know if that dates back to like a previous Temple iteration.
So I think overall she's 16-4,
right.
But 8-0 in the postseason.
Okay, so there it is. So once again, it's free money. If there's any making money with Mitch segment that we can guarantee you on this podcast, it is that DawnStaley will beat a Vic Schaefer-led squad, and we did guarantee that too. But what I told so many on Friday morning, it doesn't matter if they win or lose the national title. I believe this was DawnStaley's best coaching job because she did not have a marquee, bona fide lottery pick headed into the WNBA draft in a few weeks after the Final Four. Unlike when she had A'ja Wilson, unlike when she had Aaliyah Boston, Camila Cardoso. We have debated on this podcast, Mitch, for about 6 months now, who is the bus driver for South Carolina. I still don't know who the bus driver is, and yet they just played in the national championship game. For me, the bus driver is their head coach. There's no question about it. But ultimately, and, a friend of the program, Rebecca Kopelman, texted me midway through the second quarter, and she said, can Dawn buy them a bucket? And I said, well, that's the problem. Dawn can't help them at this point. This is on the team, and it's on the team that, yes, she assembled, but ultimately the sum of the parts was never going to compete with the parts of the sum that is UConn.
The bus driver of this team is the scheme and the system and everything else about South Carolina's culture. There's no like one star player. And yeah, we've been talking about this all season long, right? Like they didn't have that dominant big that so many great DawnStaley teams have had. Sanaya Fegan, very good player, is going to play in the WNBA, but she's not Camila Cardoso or Aaliyah Boston or A'ja Wilson. Ashlyn Watkins goes down early in the season, and like she was the type of player who was going to give them more inside. They have good guards, but not any guards who are like Paige Bueckers or AZ Fudd, where they can just put you on their back and drag you to a win and drop 30-40. Now, could Malaysia Fuwali turn into be that player? Perhaps, but we are going to have to wait and see. I think, one of the sort of criticisms that I've heard of Dawn over the past couple of days, but this is like their style and their system. Like famously, A'ja Wilson did not start as a freshman, right? Is Malaysia not developing because she's not getting playing time, or is she not getting playing time because she's not developing? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. But I think that, certainly like there's something to that. Would it have been beneficial to Malaysia this year to play, I don't know, a few more than 18 minutes per game so she could work through some of these problems that she has, the recklessness, the fouling, the mistakes and stuff like that. And
not playing defense, which apparently is at the core of why Dawn's not starting her.
Right. And work through those things in real time and figure it out in real time instead of just kind of being on this short leash and getting yanked every time she makes a mistake. So if there's a criticism of Dawn, like I think that is a valid one, and we'll just kind of have to see how this sort of thing plays out. Going forward, I mean, I think we have to assume that Tessa Johnson and Malaysia Fuwali are going to be the starting backcourt for Dawn next year. But yeah, like you said, I think
Can we assume that? Can we assume that?
Well, we'll see what the transfer portal has to hold, but as the roster is currently constructed, like I would say that unless Raven Johnson decides that she wants to come back and play one more year. Apparently she has made a decision, but has not revealed that decision. But yeah, I think, I would agree with you. I think overall, like the sum total of the parts, everything that they endured this year in terms of the injuries and then just the general makeup of the roster of not having that true number one star getting to this point. Yes, I think that is a stellar coaching job. Yeah, one of Dawn's best for sure.
You gave us some quotes from the locker room and from the podium with regards to Paige Bueckers and her Coca-Cola. What was the biggest soundbite from Dawn and from the South Carolina contingent for you coming out of this game?
Oh, I missed it. I didn't get a chance to go to South Carolina's media stuff because I was on the floor talking with or just kind of tracking down UConn celebration and stuff like that. I believe Dawn said at some point, let me see here if I can find it. They beat our ass, but they didn't make us like it. There's a difference. So there's a soundbite for you.
Print the shirts, Dawn. And she's going to use it as fuel. And that's how this process goes. And that's the system.
Yeah.
The Fulwiley situation, as perhaps besides Holly Rowe, the biggest Malaysia Fulwiley fan on the internet, myself, it's interesting because already you see people tweeting saying she's got to transfer because this can't happen again. Diana Taurasi openly asking, why is she not starting? She's the most athletic player for either team. Like, what are we doing here? It's going to be a storyline that we have to monitor, especially because we're going to circle back to some of the most interesting names in the transfer portal already here a little bit later in the program. But first, Requiem, the world's smallest violin. I'm sorry, Texas fans. We already bashed you a little bit with the Vic Schaefer disrespect. I apologize. UCLA, we've disrespected you a lot on this podcast. We were vindicated when you all but fell apart. I am playing a violin right now on my fingers if you're watching on YouTube. Hopefully Dimitri adds one in post. Mitch, what do you make of those two teams that made it to the Final Four, did not advance to the national title game? Is this the last we see of them in their current iteration at this semifinal and national championship round?
So, I mean, UCLA, I think, has a real chance to get back to the Final Four next year just because simply they have Lauren Betts and no other team does. And, you know, like she's 6'7" and she's really, really good. And, you know, UConn's strategy seemed to be, you know, all right, we'll let her. I mean, she's not going to get 60. Now she might get 30, which she basically did. But like, basically UConn strategy was we're going to force everybody else to beat us. And like Betts isn't going to take any threes. Like if she wants to live in the paint, we'll try to make things uncomfortable and difficult for her or whatever. But like, we're going to make sure we guard everybody else, which is what they did and did it pretty well, I thought. And so, you know, but I think like UCLA's roster makeup, the age of the players, that sort of thing, like if they keep that core together, they have a good chance to get back to the Final Four next year. And maybe they add a couple pieces to make them a little bit more lethal in terms of like perimeter scoring and those kind of things. As far as Texas goes, I mean, I think this is probably kind of it. Like, you know, I don't know how much, like they have to really do some work in the transfer portal to, I think, like get back into a position where they can make the Final Four again. I mean, they're really painful to watch at sometimes, like, you know, on the Duke, North Carolina level that like we have talked about before, like they're just a grind you down defensive, you know, kind of team. And then they have Madison Booker, who's really great and, you know, has a good mid-range jumper and knows how to make plays and stuff. But she needs help. Like if you want to kind of take that next step, like you need a boost of offense somewhere. And I don't know if that person exists in the transfer portal for Texas. You know, they're going to graduate some players and some players are going to run out of eligibility. So they got some spots to fill. But if I were betting on will UCLA or Texas make the Final Four next year, I would absolutely say UCLA.
As we were watching the Final Four on Friday, at one point, Kevin screamed out, "Corey, call a timeout in the first quarter." And I said, that's the critique. That right there is the critique. Has learned how to recruit in the second part of her 14 years at the head of that program. But the in-game decisions remain the biggest question mark and the biggest hurdle they have to overcome.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Yeah, I think some of her lack of end-game adjustments are a reason why that they had fallen short in recent years of getting further in the NCAA tournament. Now they got to the Final Four this year. That's a great step. You know,
it felt like they were happy to be there. Like as much as they were
so.
As much as they said, we're ready for this moment. This is 14 years in the making. It felt like they were just happy to be there.
Yeah. And UConn was focused on, we're trying to win this whole thing. And yeah, UCLA was, yes, I think they were happy to be there.
And UConn's out here not even cutting the nets down at the regional because there's no need. Real quick, just because I loved this little note that I made for us in our group chat, so I want to share it with our listeners. As soon as Gabriela Jaquez was the voice of the intros at the Final Four for UCLA, I texted Mitch and Dimitri, and I said, yep, because if there's one bus driver, if there's an alpha on that team, even if Lauren Betts on the floor is who moves that team up and down the floor, for me, after seeing the Elite Eight game, there's no question. Gabriela Jaquez, the younger sister of Jaime Jaquez, undoubtedly is that alpha. It's not Kiki Rice. It's not Lauren Betts. And then Gabriela Jaquez promptly had 0 points in 33 minutes. So, that about summed up UCLA's stay in Tampa, Florida.
Not exactly what you want, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Let's keep it moving. This one's a very exciting one to wrap up our starting five. And before we get to coaching carousel updates, Mitch, the most interesting transfer portal entry up to this point, this Sunday, April 6th, is blank.
So I'm going to disqualify two answers because I think that you could make the case for either one of these players, and it'll be a much more interesting conversation if I pick somebody else. So obviously, like, the best player in the portal is Olivia Miles, the Notre Dame point guard, who is, we don't know where she's going yet, TBD, but had a great season, is going to be a top 5 WNBA draft pick next year. We'll see where she goes. The second one that I would mention would be Tanaya Latson, who led the nation in scoring at Florida State. She's going to have a lot of offers. One player that I'm super interested in seeing where she goes is Laura Ziegler, the St. Joe's forward, 6'2" from Denmark. She was the only player in the country this season to average at least 17 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. Nearly got St. Joe's into the tournament as an at-large. I think they were one of the first 4 teams out. And an entry that we had this week was Medina Okot from Mississippi State, 6'6" from Kenya, averaged a double-double in the SEC this season, and also shot 64% from the floor. If you can average a double-double in the SEC and shoot 60+% from the floor, you're going to have a lot of options. I think those are two players sort of under the radar that could change the fortunes of a program, depending on where they go.
One name that did commit on the Sunday, the 6th of April, Gracie Merkel, leaving Penn State for College Park, Maryland. I got to see Gracie play when she was at Bellarmine. Then obviously she missed her final season at Bellarmine the entire year due to an early season injury. Transfers to Penn State, averaged over 15 points, 8 boards per game, 23 minutes of contest. For me, I am most fascinated by that pairing. So she's no longer in the portal. She is part of Brenda Fries's program. Brenda for both teams. No, we love you, Buzz. Just kidding. We love you, Buzz. We're glad with the hire, Maryland. Good job, Maryland. But I'm fascinated by this acquisition, Mitch, because this is a player who historically, wherever she's gone, the offense has flowed through her. And that is not something we saw at Maryland this year, where the guard play, and historically speaking, I would argue under Brenda, the guard play is what has been so dominant in dictating pace and dictating what the scheme is. This is going to be a complete contrast than what Maryland has looked like in the past, if that is the tempo and the style of play that they're going to cater their offense around.
Yeah, and I mean, Brenda Fries has had success with like more traditional post players. I mean, Angel Reese being one of them before she went to LSU. Another one was Shakira Austin before she went to Ole Miss. Brianna Jones once upon a time ago. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting fit too. I also like it because now you can move Sailor Poffenbarger a little bit more out of the paint and kind of give her some different things to do. But yeah, death taxes, Brenda Fries doing things in the portal. She's somebody who, while she has not won a national championship in almost 20 years now, but she has evolved along the way with the sport and has had a lot of success in recent years adapting to the portal and NIL and all that stuff.
I lied. Since you brought up Angel Reese, I realized we did skip one item, but we can move quickly through it, Mitch. This is the top 5 of the class of 2020.
Oh, sure.
Girls college or girls high school basketball. These were the top 5 by 247 Sports, by ESPN Girls with a Z. All the rankings it read as follows: Paige Bueckers, the number 1 recruit in the country; Angel Reese, who initially, of course, signed with the University of Maryland, number 2; Cameron Brink to Stanford at 3; Caitlin Clark to Iowa at 4; Camila Cardoso, of course, started her college career at Syracuse, the 5th ranked player in the country. Regardless of sport, is that the greatest recruiting class of all time in modern high school into college sports?
It might be. And can I just tell you who number 7 is?
Yeah.
Haley Van Lith.
Who's 6?
Diamond Johnson.
Listen, give Diamond her
credit.
Yep.
Yeah, she was a 50, 40, 90 player as a freshman at Rutgers, and she was ACC 6th player of the year at NC State, and has been MEAC player of the year the past 2 years at Norfolk State, and was on Saturday the MVP of the senior all-star game here. So
the entire top 7, it ended up working out. Because do you think Diamond's going to have a chance to play in the W? Obviously, she'll play overseas.
I think somebody will probably, just considering like how, for lack of a better term, like this draft class is not super deep and talented. I think somebody will take a flyer on her in the third round and just kind of see like what she can do in the W. I think her size is a concern, but like certainly like she's a talented player and a competitor. And yeah, if it doesn't work out for her in the W, she plays overseas for a long time, maybe plays an unrivaled, who knows.
I'm glad you brought number 6 and number 7 into the conversation, because if I saw one more post today about how 4 of the top 5 have now won national championships, and the most notable exception is the player who got 2 title games but never won it all. There's a difference, with all due respect, between those 5 players and the road that Caitlin Clark took, because Camila Cardoso transfers from Syracuse to a program that was already a dynasty. Angel Reese, yes, leaves one perennial power in Maryland to go to another perennial, I don't want to say power in LSU, but certainly one of the coaches on your Mount Rushmore in Kim Mulkey at LSU. Like, there is a difference, people. Please leave Caitlin alone. I don't understand. Like, again, as much as I try to tout the history of Iowa women's basketball prior to her arrival, like, you need to understand, folks, it was not 11 national titles like when Paige Bueckers got to Storrs, Connecticut.
Yeah, I was amazed that, I tweeted a thing out on Friday and then ended up writing a story about it, about how Diana Taurasi was kind of praising Raven Johnson. And my replies to that tweet turned into a Caitlin Clark debate. I still don't know how that happened.
Everything turns into a Caitlin Clark debate, but not this next one. Coaching carousel updates, Mitch. SMU's got the money that Maryland does not. And what did they do this week?
So SMU did what Auburn wanted to do, but ultimately shied away from, and they went and got AdiaBarnes. Auburn did not want to pay her buyout. SMU said, "Hold my beer, how much?" And they wrote the check. And
man that wouldn't cut Kevin Willard a check to stay an extra night in New York, but he's got the money now, folks.
Yeah, apparently the Texas oil money that SMU has does not compare to the Under Armour money that Maryland has. So there's that. So yeah, Damon Evans has some deep pockets to work with. And yeah, it's the only job change in the cycle where we've seen one Power 4 coach leave for another one, kind of like Kenny Brooks last year, Virginia Tech to Kentucky. Yeah, so AdiaBarnes gets a fresh start in Arizona. I think all parties are fairly happy about this. As we talked about before, Arizona, that marriage was ending on a sour note, and Adia was about to enter the final year of her contract and was not going to get an extension. She has a new AD from a different one that gave her that extension, and results had not been great in recent years at Arizona. So it's a big swing by SMU. I'm really curious to see how Adia does in the ACC, a super competitive league, but it gives her a fresh start, and it gives her NIL money to work with. She can go to the portal and do some things. So yeah, I'll be seeing AdiaBarnes at ACC tip-off in October. I'll also be seeing KarenBlair there, who leaves her post as Brenda Freese's top lieutenant to go to Georgia Tech. And I thought that KarenBlair might get the SMU job because she is an SMU alum and was an assistant coach there. SMU swings a little bit, more for the fences with their hiring of Adia, but I think KarenBlair is a great fit for Georgia Tech. I think that's a really good hire by them. She's been a long-time assistant coach, worked under Brenda for I think the past 7 or 8 years, and had Maryland's had a lot of success there. So this is her first crack at being a head coach, and Georgia Tech can be a tough place to win, but I think that's a solid fit. So the biggest opening now is like, who is Arizona going to get to succeed Adia? The thought initially was that they were going to go after Lindy LaRoque at UNLV. Lindy LaRoque came out with a statement on Twitter and said, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here with Dan Mullen and Josh Pastner, and we're going to get things cooking."
The best content factory in collegiate sports, folks.
So, so Lindy LaRoque is going to stay at UNLV. I don't know what direction Arizona is exactly going to go right now, but I was told they've kind of narrowed their list to about 4 candidates. So maybe in the next week, we'll see them make a hire.
I think that might be our shortest coaching carousel update that we've had in the last few weeks. It just kept spinning.
It's slowing down. We're coming to a slower spin.
It's slowing down, but we're coming in hot. Final Four 2026, Mitch. Who are your way too early 4 teams that will be among the last left standing at the big dance next year?
I think UConn is a lock. I think UCLA is going to go back. I think they're at least going to get back to the Final Four. I don't know if they're going to win, the national championship or whatever. I have to put South Carolina in there because, like, I just, there's no reason for me to not believe in DawnStaley at this point. She has some pieces to fill. She has some recruits coming in. She has some things to figure out roster wise, but I have faith that she'll figure it out. And South Carolina will be very, very good again next year and probably win the SEC and probably go to the Final Four. Number 4 spot, despite my criticisms of their head coach late in their Elite Eight game, I'm going to pick Duke to go to the Final Four next year. Because I think Toby Fournier has the chance to be maybe the best player in the ACC. Duke also has a really, really, really good freshman point guard coming in. And other than Reagan Richardson, they're not losing anybody. But they do with the departure of Reagan Richardson, and they have one more transfer leaving. They do have a roster spot open. I kind of wonder, like, if they go into the portal and get a big, like a traditional, 6'5" kind of center that they can do some things with, I think that would help them a lot. So I'm going to pencil in Duke. I think those are my 4: UConn, UCLA, South Carolina, Duke. We'll see what happens.
I like all 4. I considered all 4. I've got to go different with at least 2 of them just for the sake of this argument. So I, too, will put UConn undoubtedly. I believe that they are the favorite, and I don't know if the numbers have come out yet to suggest that. They should be the favorite to win the national title once again next year. And by the way, I think you could have gotten them like plus 1,500 or something this time a year ago to win the national championship. Mm-hmm. You're sitting mighty pretty if you put a nice little chunk of change down on that a year ago, which I remember saying, Paige is coming back. Paige is going to be on a mission. Yeah, that wouldn't have been the worst bet in the world to
sure.
Make. I will also put South Carolina in my Final Four for 2026 solely because the head coach is not going anywhere. And as long as that head coach is the bus driver and is able to do more with less and can do more with more, I will always go with DawnStaley. Let me throw a fun one at you.
Okay.
In this day and age of the transfer portal, obviously, we live in a year-to-year world. As Kyle Shanahan once said, we're all day to day. But there's one coach who proved that she could lose all but one player on her roster and not skip a beat. And that coach is Brenda Freese.
I'm here for it.
I'm calling Maryland to make their way back to the Final Four for the first time in close to a decade. I'm here for College Park to be the spring break capital of America once again. It's buzzing. Give me Brenda and Maryland among the Final Four teams. And for my 4th team, Mitch, and this one I went back and forth on. Tell me, in your estimation, where's Olivia Miles playing next year?
If I had to put money on it, based on everything I heard, it sounds like it's going to be TCU.
Okay. I was tempted. Fate was tempting me to say TCU because of that report.
Yeah.
We also have heard reports that Cody McMahon may not be following the villain arc and may not be going to LSU now, because if she was going to LSU and if Flau'jae Johnson returns, I'd be very tempted to put them in my Final Four. Instead, we're going to go with Killa Kim.
Ooh.
I'm going to go with Tennessee. Solely because, much like Brenda Freese was able to navigate the transfer portal age, as we talk about Nick Saban, as we talk about coaches who have been able to evolve in their coaching skill set, depending on what the college environment is. Look, at the end of the day, she goes 10 deep. She goes 11 deep. Mm-hmm. And that's even with a roster that I don't think is at the level that she wants it to be at. And so I'm going to buy my Tennessee stock early. I'm probably going to regret it. But at the same time, I think that she has a roster, and you correct me if I'm wrong, she's been able to rotate different pieces in depending on injury, depending on availability, and she still was able to win how many games and make the Sweet 16 for the first time as the head coach of the Volunteers. So for me, I'm going to go off the wall solely for the sake of the argument, and I'm going to put Tennessee and Maryland along with UConn, and South Carolina.
I think certainly this year for Tennessee, like what we saw there was proof of concept that like this can work. The way that she likes to play and she likes to coach. And I think that what we are going to see is the players have noticed that now. And when players go into the portal, they are going to consider Tennessee. And they're going to look at Tennessee and say, that is a very fun offense where they score a lot of points. And I might be able to take a lot of shots. And so I think there might be something to that. If I could throw out one like dark horse contender, I don't, I'll have to see like what the long shot odds on them are. I've been thinking about Vanderbilt.
Ooh, with Michaela.
I just like you have these two players coming back who both averaged more than 20 points a game this past season. Michaela Blakes and Camille Pierre. Michaela Blakes did that as a freshman. Camille Pierre is a sophomore. Like theoretically speaking, they're both going to get better. The SEC is a really tough place to play in, but like bracket luck, a real thing. Like I don't know. Like if they get into the tournament as like a top 4 seed and the bracket breaks their way and like they don't have to play sort of like one of the big, guns in the sport on their way there, like a South Carolina or a UConn, like that's I don't know, that could happen. And we'll see what Vanderbilt does in the portal too. But I kind of like the prospects of that.
Can I throw one more dark horse at you?
Sure.
I don't buy it because I don't want to say I have beef because that's way too serious of a word, but I have questions about this coach just because of what I saw when I was covering her program in the state of Iowa. Can I introduce Oklahoma and Jenny Baranczyk?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I agree. I think next year is sort of it's a big year for Oklahoma because it's the last year for Reagan Beers, and you get Aaliyah Chavez as a freshman. And you probably put some more pieces in there around the two of them. I think next year is probably like a Final Four bust kind of year for Oklahoma.
Yeah, I don't want to put Jenny in the Corey Close of the Year award nominee list as the front runner, but hey, can you get to a Final Four because we've invested a ton and you got Reagan Beers? I don't know what in-game decisions you're going to make, but you can recruit and you've got money and resources, so prove us wrong, Jenny.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to see it.
Last call, Mitch. It is our final last call of the women's college portion of the women's basketball podcast. Don't worry, folks. We're going to be back next week. It's going to be another special edition of the pod. We're going to do some WNBA mock draft action. You're going to want to listen in for that. But before we do that, we first have to give some shout outs, some closeouts, and some plugs. Shout out ElenaDellaDonne. Of course, she retired from the WNBA earlier this week. We'd be remiss if we didn't start there, as much as I want to start with Raina Harmon. This stat from my fellow Ithaca College bomber, CBS Sports' Jack Kempner, and of course, also a native of Wilmington, Delaware, is absolutely insane. Elena retires with a preposterous 93.7 career free throw percentage. One player in NBA history has shot over 91% with at least 100 attempts, and that is Steph Curry, who shot 91.1%. Not in the same stratosphere, a Wilmington, Delaware legend.
I believe ElenaDellaDonne is also the only WNBA player to have a 50-40-90 season. I think I have that right. Two-time MVP. Won a title with the Mystics. I would say the greatest Delaware Blue Hen of all time.
Sorry, Joe Flacco.
Apologies to Joe Flacco.
Yep.
I loved watching ElenaDellaDonne play. She was awesome. And Godspeed to whatever's next for her in her career.
Shout out to Raina Harmon, the longtime Iowa assistant. Speaking of the coaching carousel, is the hire at perennial mid-major powerhouse Florida Gulf Coast, who will enter the post-Carl Semesco era truly for the first time in 15 plus years. Mitch, before I give my thoughts, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this hire.
Oh, I think it's a good hire. Yeah, I think they could have went in a lot of different directions. I was told they were kind of focused on like a P4 assistant coach who wanted a really good opportunity. And I think Raina Harmon is somebody who clearly has the respect and admiration of Caitlin Clark. We saw that on social media. FGCU is a place where you can win. There are worse places in the country to coach. I mean, you're right there at the beach. So, I thought it was a really solid hire.
And it looks like they'll still be keeping the reigning three mantra, knowing that Iowa values the three, maybe not in the same light as Carl Semesco does. That's what I'm most curious to see, the evolution. But as we talked about and having covered and called a couple of Florida Gulf Coast games over the last few years, Mitch, this was no longer that 5-out defense where it was 5 shooters on the floor at all times. They have to evolve as the age of the transfer portal arrived, and you just quite frankly couldn't stockpile talent in that same fashion. Very excited for Raina. Yes, in the words of Caitlin Clark, always be marketing. Good job by FGCU getting those Caitlin Clark quotes, getting them out there early. well done. Megan Gustafson gave the ringing endorsement. Like, go on down the line. If nothing else, great PR move, but she's also a really good coach. And I'm excited to see, again, like, is it going to look different? It has to. And that's what's going to be so jarring.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if the continuation of their dominance in the ASUN continues. I think it will, though. I think Raina Harmon's a really good coach. I heard a lot of really good things just sort of about her, after this hire was done and dusted. So yeah, good job, FGCU.
And I would argue the state of the ASUN, unfortunately, will play a factor in why I think
sure.
Yes. Will continue. Just because, I mean, we've got, shout out to Erica Lambert and UNF. I mean, the fact that they, as of this writing, don't have a single player in the portal, I think that speaks more of the fact that they won one game in conference this past year than it does what the world of college basketball looks like right now. And the fact that they were so young this year, because everybody else in that conference, they got players in the portal. Last one from me, Mitch. The Twitter account, the X account, Skim Milky, went into existence 1 year ago this week. The first news bomb that was dropped was, of course, Haley Van Lith entering the transfer portal, eventually landing at TCU. The fact that these news bombs keep coming, I don't know where they come from, but I've appreciated following the content.
Yeah, I don't know who Skim Milky is. I don't know really anything about whoever runs that account. But they always seem to be right about stuff. So we'll see.
I love it. All right. Where can folks find all of your work from the incredible job you have done between both Birmingham, Tampa, and before we finally get you home so you can sleep in your own bed this week?
Yes, looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Primetime Mitch and at SB Nation at Breakaway, where I've written about Raven Johnson and AdiaBarnes and Paige Bueckers today, and some enticing potential landing spots for Olivia Miles. And then, the controversy around the double regional. Also got a lot of little scoop this past week of where the ACC women's basketball tournament is going to be next year in Duluth, Georgia. So that'll be fun, I think. We'll see.
I hear Duluth is lovely this time of year, personally. Don't worry, folks. We're not going anywhere. The WNBA draft is next Monday, the 14th. We're going to come at you at some point before then with a mock draft of our own, hopefully, or at the very least, we'll get our picks out to you ahead of that draft, which should not be occurring a week after the Final Four, but I digress. He is Mitch. I am Mia, saying this has been the Women's Basketball Podcast. We will catch you later.
Deuces.